Myohwa Net, welcome to the Wichuchum, Non-Weekdom, Paishukdom, Pingyamlingwa podcast, or the podcast of the four horsewomen who tell the truth. This is going to be our reflection episode. This is our penultimate podcast episode for the first season of academic-based podcasts because I will drag these women to a table and strap them to it to force them to hang out with me again after this class. But today we're going to be reflecting on everything we've learned, what we enjoyed learning in this class about American Indian philosophy. Let's kick it off. Who would like to start?
I think we should just quickly go over the first couple weeks because it was just introduction. So
Yeah.
I'll just go over some things that I learned. Like the basic stuff, I actually did not know it about. Like the terms like ontology, homogamy, and epistemology were all new words that I actually had to look up after because I did have no idea. So the first, the second week and the third week were basically me trying to learn all these terms because I think I only took one class of philosophy and it's been some time. So you gotta relearn all that stuff. And then, oh, that was when we learned Talesa. Oh, I loved it, even though I had a hard time understanding it.
I had read Chalice's work before a little bit. It was nice to be able to actually look back into it and kind of engage with some of the text and some of the paradigms. Even though for the first like 5 weeks I didn't really learn much, I did find Chalice's work really, really nice to go back into.
Yeah, with Teresa, I really like looking at that paradigm table. I think it was a really good, very in-depth and technical summary, but I think that was really important for me to learn because this was also my first philosophy class. And so I didn't know what like epistemology meant, nature and scope of knowledge, and I had to learn value theory and some of the other terms, ontology. And so I think it was the first couple weeks were definitely a good
Just
introduction
like
for me.
cameo. Sponsored.
Um,
Sorry, we got a cameo from from our sponsor.
um, I think kind of sum up all of what all of y'all were learning as well. Similar to Alicia and Alyssa, this is my first, or Alicia's like second class, Alyssa's first class. This is my first philosophy class as well, and my first ethnic studies class. And along with this, it's such an I feel like American Indian Studies is a subject that's not frequently taught in school to begin with, even outside of even outside of college. And so I think it was a lot of new words, like Alicia was saying, like even imperialism. That was something where I was like, I'd heard it before, but I never knew what it was. And I think with that, that's why I really found value specifically in week two, and the crash course philosophy video that we watched, and the assignment where we had to go ahead and write down the words that we didn't know, as well as research their definitions of it, because those words were all words that we ended up learning the importance of the more we continue to proceed through the class. And I think if we hadn't
Yeah.
done this assignment, I can't speak for all of y'all, I can speak only for myself, I would not have been able to have as strong of an understanding of the content that we learned if we hadn't watched that video and done that assignment as well. So I think that assignment and that video in itself was honestly my favorite part because it really set the foundation for what the rest of the class was going to be.
I agree. I think especially for an introductory course, even though, seeing it being a 300 level course, my brain instantly went, oh, upper level. But because CSUN only has this minor program, it's a little more generalized. But I agree with everything that you guys are saying. If I'm looking at it from a perspective of someone who doesn't have a degree that's about to, be done in American Indian Studies, it would have been extremely comprehensive and an easy way to get into these materials. Also, Alyssa, I think we should cheers because we both have cups.
I saw that we drank at the exact same time.
I know.
Made me laugh.
You're gonna move it towards me. Cheers.
Oh, you're on the opposite side of me. That's
Oh,
You're over
just cheers
here.
the camera. No, we tried.
okay. Okay.
Okay. Do we want to talk about week 6, which is where we got the Questions text?
Oh,
Yes.
story
Yeah, that was a
great.
good one.
I fucking loved that story, guys. When I feel it was, I'd never heard the story. I mean, I've heard other Indigenous stories, but it was so nice to see such a consensual, such a loving, such a female powered story where there's no consequences, there's just joy. And I feel like being able to sit down, this was like the first week where I was actually getting into stuff that was new for me. Sitting down and working on that Anishinaabe intelligence or research paradigm, that's what it is. I enjoyed that a lot. It was so much fun to be able to look into the consensual practice of enjoyment and learning and being able to look at this Indigenous way of teaching that allows for kids to be engaged with consent. And it's this way of life that we don't see so much in our academic system. And, you know, growing up, being on the spectrum slash ADHD, I have a problem where if I don't want to learn something or if it's too easy or if I'm bored, I would not turn in homework. I would either like finish it like super fast and like lose it in the abyss of my backpack, or I would just be like, nah, I got better stuff to do. I want to go outside and look at the crows. You know what I mean? And so being able to read Quesen's story and see her give in to that desire to lay in the warm sun and the grass and feel the breeze, and then her interacting with nature and learning from the animal teachers that are all around us, it made me so happy. It made me feel like I was looking at a past that could be possible again if we were able to make a more holistic way of educating our future generations.
I think it was like the first like major because even with the other materials like Chalesa, this was the first example of the difference of indigenous worldview versus the Eurocentric worldview, of how I loved especially how gender norms for the story wasn't something that you would see from a Western based story. It's something that was this young woman or young girl learned from disobeying a chore by just doing what she wanted, trusting herself. And I think that's a really important thing that I did learn from that week and that story that I probably will take with me whenever I continue on my journey.
Yeah. She was super observant, super smart, and she was treated as a fellow equal by her family, by her mom, by her community. And she wasn't punished. She wasn't beat or sent to a corner or like told you won't have your dinner until you get firewood. Like, no, she wasn't punished. And the way that everyone gathered around that maple tree with her, and even though
Yes.
it didn't immediately provide sap, like they trusted Quesens. They were patient and they were like, okay, well, let's see what we can do now. And so the community coming together and as a celebration of nature and community, I think that story is super sweet.
I
100%.
agree wholeheartedly with everything that y'all said. But I think, Alyssa, to your point as well, like really the fact that Quesen's family like supported her and like listened to her and weren't like, oh, you're just a child, like what do you know? I think initially Professor touched on this beautifully during class. When I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, like I was kind of tense. I was like, she disobeyed, like when's the bad thing gonna happen, you know? Because it's something that we're so used to is like you have to listen to your elders, you have to listen to your parents, like what they're telling you is law, like you have to do this. And so the fact that she was praised for being intelligent and like experiencing things and not, even though yes, maybe she did disobey and like didn't immediately get what she had, like what her assignment was, but the fact that she was like, hey, like I did this, which is gonna make this better. And her family was like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're so smart, like good job, and praised her, was really, really touching to see, especially because my initial instinct was, oh my God, they're gonna like, this isn't gonna end well. And I think it really set the tone once again for like the rest of the class and what we're really going to be studying, and showed the huge difference in what Western ideology is in comparison to Indigenous ideology as well.
You put that so well. You put that so well.
was Greg Deal? Let me look it up.
Greg Deal was
Oh,
week
third
3.
week.
We can go back to that. I'm so
Yeah, we can. We should, because I love Greg
Yeah.
Deal.
That was fantastic.
Let's go.
I had already heard of him, but I hadn't seen his TED Talk. I didn't really learn anything from it, but I did enjoy hearing him speak. And that later led to me finding out that he was in the band, the Dead Pioneers, and being able to engage with his music. I think I literally wrote that while I didn't learn much, like academically, it was fascinating to see how many Indigenous artists are Indigenous scholars as well, and that they have this legitimate crossover between art and music and life. Because Lila June, again, I literally guys showed you in the podcast, I think in our bonus episode, her song All Nations Rise, because that's how I knew about her. I had no idea she had a freaking PhD in environmentalism. So like that was crazy to me. I just wanted to add that in.
I loved Greg Deal's video. It was something that has so heavily impacted me as a person and like my view on the world. And I kept on referencing this throughout our podcast, but what he says about you are now all witness to these children's stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much of it comes down to the matter of accountability. Like, okay, you heard it. Great. What are you going to do with it? Like, why did I take this time to make this and tell you this if you're not going to do anything with it? But I think more so than anything, having a direct Indigenous like viewpoint and experience was something that was so incredibly important, especially as we're talking about an ethnic studies class and a philosophy class like this, where Greg is literally sharing, this is what my life has been like. And he does it in the most beautiful and subtle and nuanced way, but you can directly tell. You can directly understand, like, throughout the courses, you're like, this is what concept this is. This is what concept that is. You are still seeing the effects of what has happened hundreds of thousands of years ago to this day. And it was just fascinating and it was beautiful. And I truly think that more than anything else in this class, Greg Deal's video was one that I continuously kept on referencing. And I think that really speaks to the amount of impact that it had on me as a person as well.
Beautiful. Well said.
I would just like to add on what Catherine and Shelly has said. Basically, Greg Dill's video, I loved it. I looked up his art. Great artist. And I just want to connect it. I'm pretty sure I repeated this, but I'll repeat it again from last week's podcast. I really think about, the one thing I think about is how imperialism affects how a group of people are viewed to this day. And I mentioned this, pretty sure, in the last podcast with Dr. Wildcat and Greg Deals, how they both specifically mention how their indigenous is, okay, their nativeness, because I can't pronounce anything today, is being sold and advertised as like a stereotypical indigenousness.
Commodified Indianness.
Yeah, basically commercial nativeness. I'll just use native because I cannot pronounce it. How this imperialism stereotypes a group of people to this day and tries to sell this mystical, wild, they're in the natural world. Oh, I'm doing the stereotypical hippie, the hippie dance. Because often associated with the stereotype of Native Americans is this hippie attitude, which is something that still marks even now, like something how imperialism boxes in someone and it still hasn't been washed away is something that I still think about every day, and something that I will not stop thinking about.
Yeah, that made me think of something I want to talk about for our next podcast, but it fits so well right now. I think I watched the first season of Res Dogs like a couple years ago, and in that show, there's like this stereotypical like native man on a horse, and he is like at first introduced to be like this mystical character, but then it subverts your expectations because he's like just this goofy guy, but he's still like a guide for the main cast. And I love that because it just completely like 180 is what you think is going to happen be based on like Western media's view of like you said, the shamanic, mystical, wise native man, and how goofy that is.
Is so, you guys, I have to bring this up. I'm sure it's cabbage, as my grandma would have said, like I'm doing this again. Um, when I, when my mom went to university, she didn't graduate, but when she went, a very typical blonde, blue eyes, white girl went, "Oh my God, you're Native American?" And so my mom did a many moons, my people traveled. And she's like, "No, we don't live in fucking teepees." And me, in the 20, like, I think it was like 2020 or 2019. I think it was more like 2019 because the pandemic was 2020. So 2019, I go to Cal State San Marcos, this is California, in literally San Diego County, the county that has the highest density of tribes in the United States. It's got 17 tribes, 16 reservations. Tell me why. I mean, I love this girl. She ended up educating herself and she actually works with indigenous people now. But at the time, she comes up to me, small town Iowa girl, pretty much. I don't know if that's actually where she's from. That's like the energy you're getting. Like corn and racism. And so she comes up to me and she's like, "Oh my God, you're Native American?" Because I mentioned living on the reservation. She's like, "Do you live in a teepee?" And I saw my moment. So I went, "Many moons, my people traveled far down the mountain, across the land, the desert, the sea, from our sacred waters, stolen from us. We came down, we go far, long, real long, and we come to this place." And I was like doing the whole spiel, and she's like, and then she went, "No, girl, I live in a house, I have electricity, I have this." And she was so flabbergasted. And she ended up taking American Indian Studies courses and educating herself because she came from a perspective of the colonial efforts. She had been colonized in her own way to believe. And now I think she literally works down on the Navajo reservation as a lawyer.
Good for
She,
her.
I know, she completely 180'd. She heard that she found out she was wrong and she went, I don't want to be that way. 'Cause, I mean, come on, you're coming from small town to freaking San Diego County. You're gonna have like a moment of like, "Oh my God, I'm so wrong." You know, I think she's literally with a native guy. Like, good for her. Good for her. But like when you brought up the commercialization of Indians, I had to bring that up because it's like that was my moment of the many moons. Indigenous language, speaking a false accent that I don't have. But it really was a moment where it's like, no, I don't live in a fucking teepee.
Yeah, the sheer lack of American Indian studies, like across the U.S., especially in like more rural white areas, is pretty ridiculous. And the fact that DEI, critical race theory, is going to get slashed even more is actually pretty freaking devastating. And it's actually like, it is incredibly concerning how ignorant people are going to be, and that will lead to more easily more hate, racism. And that kind of goes back to what Greg Deal says also, in terms of knowledge is responsibility. We do have a responsibility with the knowledge we have to educate others, even though like, it's freaking exhausting a lot of the time.
But literally, we're doing it right now. The fact that all of us come from such diverse backgrounds. I mean, we have 4 women plus, because I'm a plus, here that are in completely different programs. We have an environmental major. We have a computer engineering and then psychology, and then me with literature and writing and American Indian Studies. We have such diverse histories as well. You know, we have 2 natives, Alicia.
We'll have
Sorry.
to talk about that the next podcast. Going through.
We do have to talk about me bullying my fellow indigenous people who don't know that they're indigenous into being indigenous. Yeah. And then we have 2 people that come from entirely different worlds, but are so easily able to relate to the colonization and the genocide and the horrors that they've been through, and this ability for all of us to sit here, completely different spaces, completely different areas, and so easily take these stories and take responsibility of them just by talking about them. And even if people don't watch right now, even if it takes us freaking forever to get one person to be like, wow, this was interesting, or to give us a hate comment. You know what I mean? The idea that we have this potential to, as people come out of this class, with each other as this support network. So in the future, when Alyssa, you graduate and you're doing environmental stuff, I'm going to be like, hey, we need an environmental advisor down here in San Diego County to help us with a build, somebody who might be able to do this. I go to Shelly and be like, hey, there's a new clinic down here in San Diego County that we need more psychologists to actually know about Indigenous stuff. I go to Alicia and I'm like, hey, we got to build some stuff online. We got to do some art programs. We got to do some really amazing stuff with even possibly animation, because even if you're not taking that class, you're still passionate about art. I might go, hey, we need to set up a whole new system. We have that potential with this network that we've created here. And I feel like in doing that, we're embodying what this class was talking about in the first place. We are being this intersectional web of responsibility where we're connecting to each other and thinking about it. I swear, I bet all of you have looked at shit that you never would have looked at and gone, ooh, that's some colonial shit. Y'all may have not thought that before, but now you see it. And that right there is the magic of this class. We all are thinking in a philosophical state that is no longer corrupted entirely by the Western viewpoint. We have this ability to indigenize ourselves to these indigenous lands and these indigenous viewpoints. And I think that's what this class as a whole is trying to do.
I agree. I think even with that, to super quickly touch on that before we move on to the next subject, it's something where even now I can say, like, in my community, like in my job or my family, whenever somebody asks, like, hey, what are you studying? I let them know about, my career path and how I'm interested in pursuing a minor in American Indian Studies. And the immediate question is, are you Indigenous? And I'm like, do I have to be?
And that's perfect. It is so
It's
critical.
like, you don't have to be. You don't have to be any form of Indigenous at all to be able to have this degree or this major or minor. All you need to do is care. All you need to do is care. That's it. It's the intention behind it.
For real. So perfectly put. I'm so happy you said that.
I actually wanted to, if you guys don't mind, since we're talking about the different viewpoints, I wanted to talk about Areola and I believe also Cordova, about the matrices that people live in.
Yeah.
And how.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let me just start off with my learning from that was basically every day, each person, I think, since we're all women and we're all come from different racial backgrounds that were colonized or some sort of destruction on the culture, that we all live in different matrices. That's what I understood. Yep. That everyone that doesn't come directly from this Euro-Western basic matrix, this little matrix that's like, oh, you have to be this, and this to be accepted. And then there's people that experience things that are not accepted, being from a different background, being a woman. I think that's the major one in academia.
For real.
Is that you live your life in a completely different lens than even, like, we probably have different experiences just because where we live, how we grew up. It's just something that I think it also ties into the who was it? Was it also Cordova that also mentions that reality is not one objective truth? I believe it's him, because it was in the same chapter that he discussed that. Or was it Areola? I don't remember their name, but I remember the concept in the chapter. But anyways, that we all have different experiences. We all have a different reality that we live in. And to respect that everybody has this different reality is the main point that I want to get across. Is that just because we don't experience the same things doesn't mean that it's not the truth. Like, you could be walking on your way and see something, but since another person comes at a different time, it's no longer there. It doesn't mean that it was never there. And I just want to let everybody else discuss.
Alicia, I wanted to add on to that super quickly before we move on. I loved how you mentioned that. I love how you mentioned the matrices and everybody else's shared experience, or rather their own individual experience. And I think it's because of that. It's everybody's individual experience. What I've gone through the course of my life, maybe you may be able to relate, but you certainly can't be like, oh yeah, I had this exact same thing happen to me every single time I mentioned something. And I think
Yep.
that in itself is the beauty behind it. And everybody's story is their own truth. It's their own truth. And denying and devaluing like what somebody is telling you, no matter who they are, is not really a way to be able to like present any type of information to the world. And I think that's why that chapter was so important, because it's really going off of the fact of, yeah, this is the truth, but this could also be the truth. And in some aspect, it's kind of getting rid of any type of, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase like any type of negative intention when it comes to being able to share like history and stories and anything like that, because it's saying like, hey, this is somebody's truth and this is also somebody's truth. And so putting value onto everybody's experiences and the things that they've gone through the course of their life. And I really love that you mentioned that, because that's such a beautiful, like subtle thing that I wish we got to focus on a little bit more throughout this class. But I love how you brought that up. So thank you for that.
I want to bring in some big words real fast and then use the not big words. I think what was mentioned so eloquently by Shelley is very much that we live in a world where we have this epistemological bias towards the Western viewpoint. So we have this knowledge bias, ways of knowing. The Western viewpoint of knowing, philosophy, this critical, like you have to do it this way, is a form of colonial violence. The epistemological genocide that's consistently going on and being propagated in the United States is not just on indigenous ways of thinking. It's on Asian ways of thinking. It's on Middle Eastern ways of thinking. It's on even some European ways of thinking. Like we still have laws against freaking showing your chest as a woman, when in Europe they're like, what do you mean booba can't be shown on the beach? What? And we have people that freak out over breastfeeding. And in Europe, it's more common to breastfeed up till a child is like 3 years old, and it makes them healthier. They get sick less. They have more immunity. And we're starting to see some changes in the United States, but there's so much epistemological violence, knowledge violence, violence on the ways of knowing, not just in the sense of religion, but medical knowledge. I mean, how many times have you used an herbal tea in your life to feel better? Have any of you've all done that, right? But when you look it up, it's like none of this is proven, none of it's scientific. Shit, you know what's proof? How I feel on my period when I use nettle tea to make me feel better. I feel better when I use these traditional medicines. And I don't need a doctor to go and say, well, we don't know, but fuck you. Fuck you for having your way of knowledge be the only way. And we're starting to see, especially in these mixed spaces of knowledge, that there is a way to live with different viewpoints and sharing and communicating and existing within integrated matrices is what I want to say. Right now, we are an integrated matrix, this podcast. We have crossed our paths to become one story in this moment when we're together. And that story is woven like a basket with many different perspectives. And I think bringing up those matrices and doing my indigenous duty of making a metaphor to baskets, when we recognize the matrices we live in, we get power over those threads. We get power over those things. And the fact that I can weave my story and you can weave your story and we can all weave them together to create something new, that is indigenous philosophy.
That was very beautifully said. The only piece I have on this, I think I want to tie everything back to boobs, because you brought that up, Kat, and then Alicia brought it up on accident. I want to make a gentle correction. His name is Arola. His areola is the skin around a nipple. Um, so just to let you
Arola.
know,
Arola?
Arola
Why
for
did
that
no one
reason.
correct me? I've been saying it.
I've only heard you say areola once before.
You
only said it once.
Once.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will correct myself.
That's so
No, but
funny.
it's actually perfect because when I think of a matrix, one of the things I think about is loose connective tissue or areolar tissue because you have these collagenous fibers, these elastic fibers, these reticular fibers. If you've seen it through a microscope,
I love you
and
so
I just think
much.
it
You're so
goofy
good at
nerd.
what you do.
But it's just like these almost like these threads, and we can compare that to the threads we have in our own lives, what our role is in the family in terms of gender, in terms of in society, in terms of in culture, art, music. Everything just comes together into this beautiful matrix, and everyone's is slightly different. And that goes back into how we intermingle with our entire community. Everyone's matrix is going to be slightly different. You can't say that one truth is above another, as Shelley was saying earlier. And yeah, I really love that about Orola's work and talking about matrices in general. So thank you for bringing that up, Alicia.
This podcast
Beautiful.
sponsored by boobs.
Yes.
They are
The
delightful.
titty committee.
If I could point out, I loved week 11 and how much we focused on sovereignty. I truly took away so much from this assignment. And I think really being able to specifically have so much research in this week was really important for me. And being able to look at so many different types of sovereignty and specifically regarding digital sovereignty, we were going through what I was going through to like respond to teammates. I was like, none of us have similar things, and that was beautiful. And I think being able to just have so many different types of sovereignty and seeing so many different examples of it as well, which are different from tribe to tribe, was even more fascinating to be able to see. Like, I think in one example, I specifically for food sovereignty, I really focused on whale hunting and how that's something that was forbidden for years and years, but now for the first time in 50 years, oh my gosh, I forget what they were called. The Inuk, they're able to go. The Inuit, sorry, Inuk is one individual Inuit. So the Inuit are able to go ahead and have their first whale hunt in years and decades, and that was so beautiful to see because this is something that's so integral to their culture. But then on one hand, I forgot it was what, but they shared the importance of their three sisters and wild rice. And I think even with that, even though it's the same type of sovereignty, it's still food sovereignty. There's so many different examples of it as well, from tribe to tribe. And I loved going through all. I think this is the first assignment where I read every single response because it was just genuinely so fascinating to be able to see how many different versions of sovereignty there are, and even more so how more types of sovereignty exist for the same type of it, if that makes sense. And I love that assignment.
Oh my gosh. I really, really want to add to what you're bringing up with the Inuit because it's so crazy to me that tribes that actually practice like ethical hunting that actually feeds the entire village, they had to stop that practice because human interference and climate change caused whale populations to become endangered. And the fact that they had to limit their own culture, their own food sovereignty because of this Western oppression, even if it wasn't like direct, but the fact that they had to make laws to protect whale species when they were doing it right the whole time is so annoying. And more than annoying, it's painful.
And I love how you pointed that out too, Alyssa. It's like they were doing it correctly. They yes, they hunted a whale. They hunted one whale that fed everybody in the tribe over the course of a year, considering the size of the animal. They didn't just kill the whale for the sake of killing the whale and using it for one specific part. And I'm talking about oil killing. They killed the whale for the purpose of sustenance, and they use it for the purpose of sustenance. It wasn't until everything else happened where they're like, well, nope, we're gonna ban it for everybody. Sorry, even though we're doing it correctly. So I love how you pointed that out as well, because that's so, so important.
I'm trying to find the channel. Okay, so she's called Sheena Nova. I follow her on YouTube
Yes.
Shorts. You
Yes.
know who I'm talking about.
She's amazing. She's
She was on the
amazing.
cover of Elle. She was in a fashion show for Chanel. She is, you know, she's out there and she's talking about, they just put out an album of throat singing, her and her mom, to keep it alive. And I was literally just thinking about how she was talking about the foods she eats. And, right, yeah, yep,
Yes.
this right here, where she's eating the beluga and the narwhal, and she shows us how they prepare it. And in these areas that they live in, you can't eat vegetables. She showed us the price of fucking
Yes.
food in Alaska. $16 for a tiny freaking thing of strawberries. Why the hell would you go and get that if it's that expensive when you don't have that kind of money? When your whole tribe can take one beluga that's older or that's, you know, slower or maybe even injured and eat every single part of it. Use every single part of it. And they dry and smoke and like use these foods for like, yeah, like you said, all year. And it's crazy because they're not just eating the meat that they think is tasty. They're eating the skin, the blubber, the liver. They're making oil. They're making medicine. They use the bones to make jewelry, to make tools. I mean, I got the experience to interact with a Yupik elder, and I've talked about him before, and he talked about his food and his villages and the different things, and I was just listening to him and looking how healthy he looks, how happy he is at, you know, in his 60s, and he's living his best life, and I'm listening to all the foods he's able to access, and I'm like, wow, I can't imagine how beautiful it would have been if my people down in California would have been able to have the same level of access to our yucca blossoms, to our acorns, to our freaking cherries, wild cherries. Even like there's so many herbs I think about, and I'm like, we used to have oaks everywhere, but oak isn't good for building homes. Oak isn't good for doing this, and it's not a sturdy enough wood, and so they just let the trees die. And it really, I agree. When we talked about sovereignty this week, I was so pissed off we didn't do a podcast because I felt like we could have had so much integrated discussion about that as our group specifically. But I agree. It was so fascinating to read through, even though I gave some examples to other people in my group and they used them. Some people didn't. I know I was able to talk about the Chia Food Collective. I was able to talk about different stores and give links. And sovereignty is such a huge aspect of Indigenous people. And being able to look at it in such a, I don't want to say like in small bits, you know what I mean? Looking at every little piece of sovereignty in different levels. And it made me feel really, really proud to see people getting excited and being engaged with these ideas and these concepts that they had never had the chance to think about before. And I think visual sovereignty, especially, was one that I thought was so cool because I, right now, literally am in a position where I'm taking part in helping with visual sovereignty and illustrating one of our traditional stories and working with paints. And the fact that I wear my clothes the way that I do when I wear them. Like right now, I'm not dressed particularly Indigenous, but I'm still an Indian. Some days I choose to wear Indigenous earrings or Indigenous jewelry just because I want to have that there because I have the right to wear it. And like right now, one of my necklaces is ironic because I was on campus and I found this beautiful necklace and it's obsidian and opalite and it's gorgeous and it's handmade in India. And I thought that was so funny because I'm an American Indian. And so I bought it and I went, okay, this is me recognizing the funny ha-ha of, you know, my name. But in doing that, I was allowing myself to present myself in a way where I wasn't restricted to looking like a stereotypical Native American. Because I struggle because I'm a light skin and I look white. I pass as white. And I recognize that that's my privilege and that's my blessing from Creator so that I can walk in spaces that others cannot. That I can be a warrior in areas that people who have darker skin, like my little cousins, would get kicked out of. I have this privilege as someone who has light skin to be a word warrior in areas that others can't. And so my act of sarcastic sovereignty was to buy this piece and support this community that I was wrongly named for. And while somebody might go, that's not sovereignty, to me, choosing where I put my money instead of buying a necklace from Etsy or eBay from like a big shipping company that's just drop shipping. I got to speak to the man who imports these things, and he talks about the Nepalese women who weave the bags and the Indian people who make this jewelry. And I saw it and I went, okay, I'll spend my money on that because I, who worked hard to do this, am deciding that I'm going to make a joke of my Indianness. I'm going to enjoy it because that's how I choose to present myself. And I'm still Indian while doing it. And so I wanted to bring up that idea of visual sovereignty and existing and looking Indian or choosing not to look Indian, choosing to dye your hair even though it's not traditional, choosing to cut your hair even though it's not traditional, and having people go, well, you don't have long hair, you don't look like an Indian, or you don't have dark skin, you don't look like an Indian. It's like, well, yeah, what who do you picture? You picture a Native American. Are you talking about what is it, John Redcorn from King of the Hill? Or are you thinking about Pocahontas? You're thinking about the crying Indian who was actually an Italian, not Indian at all. You're thinking about who you thinking about? Who is giving you this opinion? And it makes me laugh. I've gotten to a point where, as part of my indigenousness, as part of the sovereignty in my own thing, I take humor in it. I take light of it. And that is my act of power. And so I just wanted to bring up that idea of visual sovereignty as well.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that quickly and also talk about sovereignty that wasn't mentioned, but I really like the idea of it. So, visual sovereignty, I really like what Catherine brought up. It's whether the choice of how you want to represent yourself is really an important thing, and I think that people don't really think about that. Like, if you chose to wear, like, one of the things that I would want to wear is, especially for like a future special event, is a dancing dress. I really like them. They're very pretty, and something that I do think about is, since I'm like one of the in my family that isn't mixed with white, but is, well, I am mixed with white because of Spanish colonialism, but the one that recent generations wasn't white. My dad isn't white, but he's pretty light. But the thing I think about is me, I'm being the lightest in my family that's not mixed with white. I look pretty, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about how I look. We
You
can
look
discuss that in
indigenous.
the later episode, but I always think about how, if I do wear more traditional Mexican attire, how it'd be viewed. And I think that's a part of sovereignty, whether am I letting myself be convoluted by your Western society standards about, if you don't look like the stereotypical Mexican or
Yep.
indigenous person, you're not allowed to wear this, or you're like feeding into this. Like, it's a dual-edged sword. But anyways, I also want to talk about the other sovereignty that I think about since I was little: historical sovereignty, the right to know your own history and not have it taken over by another history just to make themselves look better. And the one thing I
Ugh.
remember is, I'll bring this up, and I know Catherine will get upset, but I'll bring it up. The the missions. When I was in the fourth grade, I had to build a mission, and by the history that I was told was, this was given. These children were abandoned by their native mothers, and the kind Catholic priests and nuns came in and took care of these children when they had no one else. And that's basically the history that I learned in fourth grade, is that these missions were here to take care of the native children, and they were teaching them about God and learning how to be a good Christian person. And I think about how much different it would be if actual indigenous people had the sovereignty to control what children would learn. Like, even indigenous children would come into these schools and learn this. I'm not sure if it's still in fourth grade. I'd have to ask my younger cousins, but it makes me think about, is this still something that is being pumped out through a textbook and still being told?
Whew. Give me a second. Let me just die for a moment.
I know, like what you're saying was like we think of so many things, but I am concerned about time. Where are we at?
I think we're past it.
Yeah, we're already past it. If you guys would just want to do some closing thoughts, because I think we covered everything.
I do really right before we do. I want to talk about the time and space one. That first podcast we did.
Oh, there's too many things to talk about.
That's so
I don't know.
good. Everything that we learned was so good.
I know once we started doing the podcast, it was, I love you guys. You guys are great. But no, I just wanted to give a quick talk on that. I really loved that whole section because it gave me a huge inspiration for my own writing about this idea of cycles in the same place, in the same time, creating a pattern that is without time. It is within space. In the indigenous way of doing things, when rituals were done, when dances were done, when community ceremonies were done in this exact same place at this exact same time, every single year, thousands and thousands of years. And this brings up, just at the end, when the idea of sacred geographies and profane geographies was brought up with the Nelson, wasn't it? In the God is Red, the future of God is Red. He talks about this idea of how sacred geographies have been turned into profane geographies. And I think about that pertaining to time and how time is this linear thing for Western society. But for indigenous people, it was space and then time. You know what I mean? And so I just wanted to bring that up because it was so critical.
Yeah, this class has been great. I've learned a lot from it personally, and it has been a good introduction for me for American Indian Studies. And I really also like the Space and Time Week, of course, because I got to properly meet you guys and start this podcast with you all, and I really appreciate that experience. It's been great.
I'm not going to talk about it because it's going to be an hour-long podcast because of how much I love that chapter and the concept of it.
We're just gonna have to make an episode just talking about that.
But oh my God, it was so good. But yeah, I mean, exactly what Catherine said, exactly what Alyssa said. I've learned so much throughout the course of this class, specifically, and I feel like it's changed the way that like my outlook on the world as well and how I'm trying to live my life. So I think it did its job. But also, like, once again, I keep on going back to this, like, the earth that we have isn't unlimited. The earth that we have, the quantities that we have, it's not ever expanding. Like, this is what it is. And if there's one thing that I would love to go ahead and leave it off, it's treasure what you have, protect what you have, because there's no more of it. And I know, I mentioned, there's no planet B. Like,
I was waiting for your catchphrase.
Like, make sure that you're doing right by the planet, and the planet will do right by you.
Okay, I would just want to close off, and even though I met Catherine, we had a meetup a week before with the Nisnabe paradigm. You carried it. I just want to say that. And I would say that this class helped me relearn a lot of things and question a lot of things about how I view things and how I view that'll be a next episode, but how Mexico also relates to this, but because I love the history of Mexico and I love how it relates to this. Anyways,
Turtle Island.
I love everything we learned, and especially during the podcast, because I learned a lot more by hearing your guys' viewpoints, and I want to say that I'm glad I took this class.
I'm glad I took this class too.
I'm glad we started this podcast. I'm glad I made you guys as friends, and I'm glad we have this potential to do so much together and learn so much together, because we are Wichuchum, Nanwiktum, Paishutum, Penyanwa. We are the 4 horsewomen of truth telling, and it is our duty to be honest. And I think that class has given us a space to actually use honesty.
It's a perfect ending.
I love that. Wow. It's almost like you practiced this.
No. Never. All right.